Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of CAD Revision Q&A. And these are videos where I take feedback from users in my free group and I answer it just like I would as if I was on a consulting call with you. So today we have several questions lined up and it's going to be pretty informal where I look at each question and kind of either answer it in full or at least give you some direction as to how I would handle this specific problem. So here we're looking at the group, and again, there'll be a link in the description where you can join, and basically people will ask their questions and I will answer it in a video just like this. So let's get started. So I bookmarked the post I'm going to be answering today, and the first one said I would like to flip my boards or sheets when routing out shaker doors. Would you possibly know how to do that? And then I asked just to clarify, if he's trying to do like a back route. And so, yeah, basically he wanted to be able to do what CAD Vision calls six-phase nesting. And so there's two parts to this question. First of all, how to use six-phase nesting in the machine settings, and then also how to add a back route to MDF doors. So I'm going to just cover this pretty briefly. So in CAD Vision, the first thing that needs to happen is we need to make sure that we go to our CNC, go to Output, and we're going to scroll down all the way to our six-phase output. And this is where if you have a operation on both sides of the sheet, you can put the sheet upside down, it'll run just the backside operations, and then you flip the entire sheet rather than flipping parts one by one. So it's a really fast way to do two-sided operations. When you do your integration with CAD Vision, a lot of times they'll set this up for you because it's kind of the standard way of doing things. But that's the first thing that needs to happen in order to be able to do that. And the second thing is you actually have to add a back route. Okay, so if we go into our door catalog in CAD Vision, there's a lot of different ways of doing MDF doors. So the first way, if we just do new, and I'll just call this my own actual MDF door maker, this is where if we use CAD Vision's little template door maker. So, you can pick your spacing and stuff. But you'll notice you can't actually edit this. So I can't go to the cam editor and put a route on the back side. So it's a little bit limiting in that way. Now, what I could do is I could do new, I'll call this my own slab MDF, and just add it as a slab door. And then this way I can go to design and, I can add my rectangle, do my front route. And then I could go to the back side of the door and do a back route. Now this is not a great option because first of all, you're going to have a fixed frame size. And then if you want to do multiple panels, you'd have to create a different door for everyone. It'd be hard to section this at all. So CAD Vision's MDF door maker is average at best. So if you want to use the built-in way, you almost have to add it as a slab door and then just put intelligence on your routes. And what I mean by intelligence, you'd have to tell it that, this is 2 1/4 if you want to do a 2 1/4 frame. And then the width of this route, you'd have to say -5. Or 2 1/4 times 2 1/4 would be 4 1/2. But you can see how limiting this can be. If you're only doing single panel doors, this might work, but it really leaves a lot to be desired because, now you have to pick your tool set. It's just a lot harder to change. But that's how you'll have to do it, is you'll have to add a slab door, add your route to the front, and then you're able to do your back route. Now, if you remember, I made a video here several months ago on how I like to do MDF doors. And so just really briefly, I'm going to show you how much easier it is when you use that type of a structure. And I'm not going to cover all of the MDF doors in this video, but so with this one, I have just, same type of idea. It's a one-piece door with a routed slab, but I'm going to go into my UCS and I have an option set up for back route and I can just say enable back route. And you'll see it does that. And the nice thing about my UCS is it's not limited to just what you have. I could make the left side 4, I could section this to whatever I wanted, and the back routes will follow that, which is pretty cool because it will look like a 5-piece door. And that would be totally ready to route. So it'll be kind of a challenge. If you're using actual Cabinet Vision MDF door maker, it'll be a little bit of a challenge. I would highly recommend follow along with that video. Or if you don't want to go through the technical side, I actually have it for sale on my store as well. So that's how I would handle that. Obviously, I prefer my own UCS, but if you are going to use a regular door, you'll have to add it as a slab door so that you can add your own route in the CAM editor back at the door library. Okay, so let's unbookmark this. Now, the next one is we use linebores to mount our rollouts so the customer can move them later. Would there be a way to tie our linebores to the mounting hoe on a guide via UCS? Kyle said he's also interested in this, which this is actually, I do something very similar for, if you've heard of the X Series pilaster system, I'm doing something very similar to this where I add pilasters to the guide linebore. So it's almost the same thing, except rather than adding the pilasters or the boards, we're going to fire a linebore. Now, there is a little bit of a question of, well, do you just want it to be a certain number of hoes, for every guide, or does it actually need to be more of a bore by opening style? Because you don't really want to leave gaps. Like if the rollouts are spaced out, you wouldn't want to leave where there's no hose in between part of it. And then at the same time, you don't want to fire too many hose. So we'll get into that a little bit. I do want to cover this video. It's probably going to be a little bit lengthy, but I think this is a good topic here. So I did ask some clarifying questions, and it looks like he's, he just drills a line bore and then he can mount these little spacers wherever he wants to. So this is a good one. So let's go into Cabinet Vision, and I'll show you how I would handle this. Okay, so first of all, let's put in some rollouts, and I'll explain what he's asking here. So I'm just going to drop in a rollout. Okay, and so essentially, you see how the drawer guide has hose on it? He wants to be able to fire a vertical line bore into the sides of the cabinet so that the rollout can be mounted wherever it fits. Okay, and we're going to just explore this. I'm going to show you the most simple way of implementing it, and then I'll show you how it can be even better than the simple implementation. But let's get started by just adding a line bore so that it fires into the sides, and let's just do like 5 hose for right now. So let's go into our UCSs. And if at any point, if this doesn't apply to you, you can skip into the next question. I'll try to put chapters so it's easy to skip around. So let's do a new UCS. And I want to add an operation, and I want it to be a vertical line bore. And I'll just call this adjustable tray. And I can't really link it to it needs to be like the drawer guide bore. So I'm just going to link it to a board for right now, and then we'll change the for each line. So what I mean by that is it generated for each board, but we want this to be the drawer guide part name, which I will show you in a second. And then it generated the VBore, like how we add a VBore. So let's go back and look at the object tree. So in the object tree, there's rollout guide, and if we open that up, we will see the name of our drawer guide bore. And you can see it actually is 1, 2, and 3. Let's focus on just the first one for now. So let's do drawer guide bore 1. So I'll change that to the for each line. And then let's just change just a couple things here. I want this to be visible. I want to do a 5mm hoe. DX and DY is just the width. Technically, I think you can do just DX on a V-bore, but it's fine. We'll put DY as well. And let's do 10mm deep. And let's put a repeat in. We're going to add just 5 for now. And again, I'm going to show you how to take it even a step farther, but for now, we're just going to do 5. And then the spacing is going to be 32mm. Okay. Now, what's important is I'm not wanting to fire the hoe on the other hoe. I want it to be what I call a master hoe, or a primary operation, where it knows to fire into a part that's touching it. So the first thing I want to do is I'll put master Linebore. Okay, and then let's go ahead and look at this and see what it's doing. Okay, so you can see it's adding. So just at a glance here, this is a good start. Now it could be that it's backwards. You know, it might be facing this way. So let's try that. Let's just flip the AY 180 degrees. Yeah, there we go. So what was happening there, I added it to the Linebore, and it was actually like, you know, it was looking for a part in that direction. So by rotating it 180 degrees, I made it look this way, which is what I want. Okay, now the next thing that happens is it's not always going to be touching. You know, sometimes when you have rollouts, you need to adjust the clearance. So it might be -1.5 or -1. And then the hose aren't firing, and we wouldn't want that. So we can add a special little parameter. So let's go vbore._norm. And then we could make this smart and try to calculate the gap, but for now I'm just going to say 2 inches. So if it's within 2 inches, I want to go ahead and fire this. That allows the hose to go ahead and fire. And then I don't love how it like shows the little remnants of those hose. Let's see if we can get rid of that. I'm going to try 2 things. I'm not totally sure which one will work, but I'm going to make the slave depth 10 millimeters. I'm going to make the actual depth 0. Okay, that didn't do it. There's also a parameter called s_suppress, where it suppresses the original one. Let's try that. Okay, for whatever reason that's not working. And it also is out of line with, it needs to be right on that drawer guideline, because that's the whole point of what he's doing here. So let's see if we can get rid of this. Let's move owner down to the bottom. And let's see what we got. Okay, I think we just want to give the X position the same value here. I'm just figuring this out as I go here, so bear with me. There we go. Okay, so that at a glance is what he's asking for. But again, this is the most simple implementation. This is just a set number of hose, you know, when this is true. And obviously you could add more hose. You know, you could say, I want 10 hose, and you could almost make this work. You know, and you could even put a little attribute on the rollout front where you say, you know, add hose, and you say how many hose. But the go is you don't want to make more manual clicks than you have to. So when I do a solution, I don't want to just do half of a solution. Like if we're going to automate something, we need to make it as smart as possible for the user. Because think about, you know, here we have a rollout, and we might have another rollout down here. And then if you had one that was really close to the top, you know, you don't want to do stuff like this. That's just bad practice, because then it relies on the rollouts being in the right spot, and you got hose going out the top. Like that would just not be a good execution at all. And, you know, arguably, yeah, you could do less hose so there wouldn't be overlap, but the spacing would still be different. It wouldn't, and you don't want to try to move the rollouts to preserve the 32 millimeter spacing. So we need a better solution. So what I did for the X series bracket is I made so it only added on the bottom rollout, and then I calculated the height of the opening. And so I'm going to show you just a little bit how I did that, because I think that is the solution that makes the most sense here. Because anybody could, you know, it's, like I said, it's very easy to just make the hose fire, but it's not really the solution we're looking for here. So let's get rid of our rollouts. And what I want to do is I want to do something that only works on the bottom one. And so what I did for the X series, which I think works well, it makes kind of a slightly different step in how you add it, but it's a great way of recognizing it. So you can snap it to the bottom. And then what that does is that'll add a parameter that I can recognize when it's on the bottom. So let's add another UCS. Let's copy this. Let's call this adjustable tray 1. And this one will store an attribute because we might want to be able to turn this on or off. So first thing we got to do is we now want to operate on the rollout front. That's where I want to put my attribute. And just bear with me. When you see the final product, you're going to see how nice this is. So I'm going to say if parent PCTR equals 3. And what that means is this rollout was snapped to bottom. Okay, so only the bottom one is going to have this. Actually, it's colon, because it needs to go back to the tray open, which I will show you that. So if we click on our rollout front, it goes back to the rollout box and then to the tray open, and that's where that PCTR parameter is. Okay, so if this is here, we're going to add a little adjustable tray add equals null. I'm going to add an attribute so you can turn it off if you don't want it on all of them. Now I do want to turn it on by default because I assume that if somebody snaps it to the bottom, I want to go ahead and add these spacers. Okay, so this is my first step right here. Now I have an on-off switch, which is true, and that one will only show up on the bottom one. So if I had rollouts above this, they're not going to get that rollout add. These are just going to kind of carry off of the bottom one. I always want to work with the bottom one because that's where my hose are going to originate from. You can see I'm still getting hose everywhere, but we haven't put that logic into place yet. Okay, now here's the tricky part. How do we only get this to fire on the bottom one? And the simple answer is, well, if the PCTR is there, then I know I can go ahead and add it. So let's go ahead and try that first and see what that does. So let's go into where we added the B-bore. And let's say the only way we want to fire this is if, what is that, PCTR equals 3. So that should get the bottom rollout only. And I'm actually going to have to put a path here. It's not a direct path from the rollout guide to the, oh, maybe it is. Yeah, sweet. It did find that. I didn't even have to put colons. Sometimes if it jumps around like parent and then a different child, you have to type it in. But that actually worked. It found itself. And so that's cool. Now, what about, how could we make it dynamic? You know, yes, I could just put another attribute down here where I say how many hose do you want, and you could change it every time. You know, that would be fine. But I'd like to be able to read the opening height. That way, whenever I add rollouts, it would just know how many hose to put in. And the cool thing is, it's cabinet vision, so I can do that. So, we're going to need, I'm just going to keep doing separate UCSs so it's very easy to see the different parts. You could technically combine some of these then. But so this is going to be for the tray. For the tray open. Let's just get rid of this. Okay, and I want to be able to find the opening. So just to describe what I'm doing, find the correct interior opening and add reference parameter. Okay, so in order to do this, we got to add a little counter. So I'm just going to call adjustable open count. And this is getting into a loop, which is one of the more complex things you can do in UCS, but also one of the more powerful options as well. And again, this video is more focused on how I would answer the question, and you're going to also learn about UCSs as I'm doing this, but I'm not going to go super in depth in explaining every single thing I'm doing. But basically, what I want to do is I want to be able to take the tray open, and I want to be able to tie it to the right case opening. And when I say case opening, I'm talking about, so it knows how big this is, that red outline. Because if I can get the height of that, I can add the right number of hose. So that's what I'm going to be doing with this loop. I got to loop through all the openings and find the one that matches. So while cab interior dot case opening at my counter in curly braces. Okay, so while that ID is greater than 0, do this. And what this essentially says, if it finds 1 case opening, it'll run once. If it finds 10 case openings, it'll run 10 times. But basically, for every one it finds, it'll run this loop. And here is the loop that we want to run. So everything inside this will continue looping for each one it finds. And at the very bottom of the loop, we'll increase the counter so it knows to continue on with the next one. Okay, so again, don't worry if this is confusing. Loops are one of the hardest things with UCSs. Okay, now, how do you know which one it is? Like, it's one thing to loop through all the openings, but how do you match it? And what we can do is, if we go look at the object tree, and we go to the tray open, there's a pair ID number of 1. And so what that tells me is the ID of the case opening will match the pair ID of the tray open. Let me type that out so you can see what I'm talking about here. So if this pair ID, so if the tray opens pair ID perfectly matches the regular ID, then I know that's the connected case opening. So when that happens, what I want to do is I want to store a little height parameter. So I'm going to say adjustable tray height. And then I'll be able to use this little reference parameter whenever I dim my number of hose. So I should be able to just put dy. Okay, so that's cool. So now when I go to my tray open, it actually shows the tray height. Okay, cool. Now let's go back to our VBore. And instead of repeat at 5, let's take tray opening height. I forget what that parameter name was. Yeah, tray height, that's fine. And let's put this divided by 32 millimeter. And then we want to truncate that so that it becomes so it like rounds to the nearest integer. And let's go ahead and put a colon on that to fire it immediately. Okay. Now, it's not firing, and that's probably because this UCS is below it, and it needs to be above it, so let's move it up 1. The order of the UCS is kind of important, because if I'm referencing that parameter here, it needs to be below there where it was actually setting. So let's call this 3. There we go. Now, arguably, I probably wouldn't want to go all the way to the top, because that's just too many hose. So let's do this -1. That way it just does 1 less hoe than it actually needs. That way it stays a little bit more in line. Okay, that's very cool. And so now we have a very flexible, let's switch to a different cabinet. Let's do more of a tall cabinet so we can do a better example. And let's just make this 50. And again, it does require that you add 1 rollout, change it to a rollout tray, and stick it to the bottom, but then you can add as many as you want from there. But that is a requirement for how we're doing this. And there we go. It adds all our hose. So, we did this only on the drawer guide 1, but let's do drawer guide 1 and 3. So let's just put both of these up here. Now we should get 2 entire lines of code. So now this would be machine ready. You could pop those spacers in anywhere you wanted. Now, arguably, we don't really need the drawer guide hose. So really what we should do is we should quantity all those out. But I'm not even going to worry about that in the example because that's not what the question that was being asked. But you can see how powerful, in just a couple minutes time, I can make something like this very flexible to where, nobody's having to say how many hose they want or what they need. I can read the opening. I can make it just all enable automatically. So to answer your question, is there a way to tie our line bores to the mounting hoe? Yes. And you can do that however simply or however advanced you want it to be. My recommendation is if you're going to do something, do it smartly and do it correct. Okay, so that's all for this one. I'm going to unbookmark this and we're going to move on. Okay, now this one I actually answered in the first episode. However, I think I might have misunderstood him. So part of this new group is going to be you guys getting better at wording things and also me getting better at asking clarifying questions. So that's perfectly okay. So what I thought he was asking was, he was going to filter a report and it wasn't filtering, like it was just leaving the data how it was. But what he was actually asking was he wanted to change the order. He wanted to sort it by cabinet number, actually. So I'm just going to show you that really briefly. So let's go into our reports. And let's just get a door list. And a lot of these are not even, cabinet number is not even showing here. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to pull cabinet number in. Just so we can see the very fact that it's not sorting. So let's go doors. No, I can't type in here. This is probably a system report. Let's just copy this. Call it sort by cabinet. Okay, so we want to add doors.cabinet ID. And then every time you add something in the select, it'll tell you to add it in the group by, which is fine. We can do that. And then we just click on the table to make it refresh. So now we have cabinet ID here. Let me pull in another cabinet. So we got 2 things we're working with here. It'd be hard to tell if it's working if we don't have multiple cabinets. Okay, now let's go back. All right, so we did the first part. We have our cabinet ID showing, but you can see it's not ordering by that. If I just view it evens in preview mode, well, it's not showing yet. Let's replace cabinet quantity with our new field. And I know I'm moving fast, but the point of these videos is just to quickly catch a lot of good answers to questions rather than to thoroughly explain each one. Because I think through this, you're still going to pick up more than you realize. So let's pull in cabinet ID. Okay, so now forget the decimals. That's an easy fix as well. But you can see it's not ordering by the cabinet ID. It's it's doing other stuff first. So what we can do is go back into report properties where we added that in the first place. And you'll notice there's an order by field. So what it's doing is it's adding by door name, then material schedule, then profiles, and then it goes into height. So what we need to do is we need to put this somewhere in here. So now you could do it first, so that cabinet ID is absolutely the final answer. Then it goes 1, 2, 3. But if you had different style of doors, you might want that door to print out and then filter by cabinet ID before it breaks another door. Otherwise, you might get more of these door style headings than you want. But that's essentially what we're dealing with there. You have to make sure that you have the field visible, and then it's just a matter of picking the priority of what the order by is. So hopefully that gets your question this time, Chris. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that bookmark. And the last one is how do I edit a report to not include cabinets that have no CNC applied? So this is a good question. Because if you have no CNC applied, basically what he's using this for is, he wants to turn off certain rooms or even certain cabinets, and he doesn't even want to see it in Report Center. So, that could be, removing it from, the door list, the drawer list, the face frame, it could be a lot of things. And, if he's taking that off, it'd be nice to just get it out of Report Center at the same time. That's essentially what he's asking. If he doesn't want to machine it, he doesn't want to own Report Center as well. So I mentioned that I often use EDX as a way of totally removing it from Report Center. That way Report Center doesn't know anything about those. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to edit a bunch of reports if we don't have to. It's going to be easier to write the UCS that I'm about to show you than it would be to modify 5 or 6 reports. And so I'm going to show you how I would handle something like this. So he did mention that he wants to be able to do it by room as well. So we can handle that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the main screen, and I'm going to create a room parameter. And I'm going to just call it CNC. Let's just call it send to CNC. I'm just going to make up my own name for this. I'm just going to say Cabinet Explorer CNC. I'm going to make a little drop down. So I'm going to say send to CNC equals 1, and then do not send to CNC equals 0. And I want this to be a room level attribute. I'm just going to copy this stuff, and then let's go into a job, and then I'll show you how to add the UCS to kind of make this a more powerful solution than just, because he basically did the start of this. You'll notice he said it is a system parameter used per room and per cabinet, but by doing a UCS, I want to be able to do multiple things in once, so it'll take it a step farther than what he currently has. So let's pull a cabinet out. Okay, so we have our new, whoops, looks like I messed up I forgot to tell it to be a list. Let's go back and fix that. I'm not going to edit any of this stuff out because this is all good stuff whenever I forget stuff as well. So in order for it to be a list, you have to use these little open close carets and just put LST for list. Okay, let's try that again. And we'll pull out a wall cabinet. Okay, so now we have send to CNC and do not send to CNC. Okay, now what I would like to do is I would also like to have this as a cabinet attribute and a part level attribute. Okay, so not only do I want to be able to change it at the room level, but I also want to be able to click on a cabinet and have the same options. And then also, while I'm inside a cabinet, I want to be able to click on a specific part and have the same options. So I'm going to set both of those up. And again, just to keep it simple, I'm going to do all separate UCSs. You can combine it however you see fit. So we're going to call this CNC and then 1. And the first one is going to be the cabinet level one. And it's simple. Its only job is to add the attribute. I like to add attributes this way rather than system parameters because I just don't like system parameters, but you can do this however you like. So we're going to make it the same little thing, except I'm going to put cab on this one. And we're going to give it the same exact options as what we had. And I want to make it a list. And I'm going to add one more option. So notice how I don't forget those little single quotes. That's important for a list when you're doing it through the UCS editor. But I want to add another option called follow room. And I'm going to set that to -1. Okay, so you're still going to have control of it. If you don't want it to follow the room setting, you'll be able to take it off and override it to whatever you want. But by default, it will just follow what the room parameter says. And I use this type of logic all the time. Anytime I need control at the room level, I almost always set it up this way with a follow room option, just because it gives the most flexibility in my opinion. Rather than trying to put the system parameter like directly in, I like to create my own parameters and then have the UCS to apply the logic. As we continue typing here, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so for each cabinet assembly, it's going to add an attribute. So let's go look what that did. Okay, so we have the room parameter, which says send to CNC. Then we have the cabinet parameter, which says send to CNC. But notice it has the follow room. And I'll often put a underscore on the follow room. I forgot about that. And what that does is that keeps follow room separate from the other options. Yeah, you can see I'm actually doing it in this other UCS as well. And so, like I said, you can always click on a certain cabinet and take charge of it, but by default, it'll be whatever the room's telling it to be. Okay, let's do one more example. Let's just copy this. And we're going to call it CNC2. And this is going to be for all parts. And anytime you do for all parts with this asterisk, it's always a good idea to, if object does not equal 17, then exit. Because if you go look at the object parameter in the help files, just go to UCS, system parameters, and just do Control F and search for object. So notice if you do for each part, it'll actually run on a whole lot of things, but I only want it to run on actual parts. And so that's just a low performance enhancement to just put that at the top of a UCS where you are grabbing all parts. Okay, now on the part one, I want to slightly switch up the attribute name. And instead of follow room, it's going to follow cabinet. Okay, now I know that's kind of confusing, but you're going to see, now down here is where we actually do stuff. I can type. Okay, so if the part level attribute is set to follow the cabinet, so if that equals -1, I'll just put little comments here to help us keep this straight. So if it's on follow cabinet, then I'm going to create another parameter. And I always use the word value when I'm actually, this is the one that actually matters. So if it's on follow cabinet, I'll set it to the attribute I created for cabinet. Otherwise, the value is going to be whatever the part is set to. So if somebody clicks on, say, the finish left in and takes charge of it, say pick send to CNC or not to send to CNC, then that will run. Now, this works good if we only have a two-step thing, but we actually have multiple steps. So inside of this one, I need to check if the cabinet level one is also set to follow room. And this is confusing, but if you can get a hold of this logic, this is a really powerful way of handling room and like multiple level logic. Because like I said, I do this over and over again. So let's recap. If the part level attribute is set to follow cabinet, before we actually set it to the cabinet value, we check if the cabinet one is also set to follow room. And so if it is set to follow room, I want to use that and put the cabinet attribute down here. Okay, so like I said, if you can figure out this logic, you'll be able to reuse this over and over again, not just for this specific example, but anytime you have something you need to possibly control at the room level. So if it's -1, it follows the cabinet, then it checks if the cabinet is following the room, and then if the part has been overridden. So now what we have is we have a value parameter that is always correct. So I can say if the value is 1, then that means send to CNC. And I actually don't have to do anything here because this just works by default. Right? I just typed that out just so you could see it. But if the value is 0, this means do not send to CNC. Now here's where the magic is. So he was already using no CNC, right? So that was already working for him. And let me just go look up this parameter so I can show you what the values are. Right, so if it's 0, we want to go ahead and send it to CNC, but if that's 1, we do not want to send it to CNC. Okay, so let's put that logic in. So no CNC equals 1. Okay, but here's where I can take it a step further. I can say edx equals minus dx and edy equals minus dy. And this right here is what removes it from Report Center. So if a whole cabinet has been turned off, you're not even going to see any of the frame parts, the bottom, the deck, the left end. These two lines right here remove that from Report Center. And that's what's going to make this just really feel nice. So let's pull 2 cabinets in. And the first thing I want to do is let's just at the room level control this. So let's say do not send to CNC. So now when I go to Screen to Machine Center, there's nothing here. Now if I turn it back on, send to CNC, now we have our parts. And so, like I said, he already had that logic. That was easy because he could just set the parameter directly. But what we did on top of that is if I go to reports and just look at, let's get a panel stock report or something. Okay, so yeah, we're getting all these parts, right? But now if I say I don't want to send this room to CNC, now I'm not getting any parts. So anything in this room is not going to be found. You can see the drawers are removed. Now the doors are not, and I think the reason for that, I think object actually is slightly different on door object. Object. Yeah, see it gets its own little thing. So you have to be a little bit careful with the object removal. So you might want to say if it doesn't equal 12 and 13 and 17. And you could maybe 32 as well. There's probably a couple that we need to check. I do like the idea of filtering it, but it's actually, there's several things here that I would like to have now that I'm looking at it, because, drawer box, slide, connectors, hinges, like all those things I'd kind of like to have. So maybe find a little bit better way of handling the performance side of things, but we can see that's working. And now what's really neat is, I have the control at the room level, but now I also have the control at the cabinet level. I could take it off and say, just on this cabinet, don't send that to CNC. Whereas this one, could still be following the room. And the reason I like this is because it's more of an override. Like, it's more of a conscious effort that, like, this is different than the room. And even beyond that, like, on each individual part, I have that type of override as well. So, like, I could turn off an entire room but cut one back. Or I could turn off a whole cabinet except for those 2 parts inside. And so that's the type of things that I like to have. I like to have a lot of control. I think a setup like this is definitely the way to do it, because he mentioned the fact that, like, he only, how did he word that? He wants to if he's doing a large job, maybe 3 of 12 rooms will be part of phase 1. And so he could have multiple rooms, and room 2 could be on send to CNC, and room 1 could be on do not send to CNC. And then when he goes to Screen to Machine Center or any report for that matter, then it would be very easy to keep that separate. Because see, we're only getting cabinets from cabinet 3, which is in room 2. So yeah, that's how I would handle something like this. It gives the user full control, and if they change their mind, it's easy to just set it back to follow room rather than producing overrides that are a little bit harder to keep track of. So let me go back into that UCS, and that way you can see this. So we added a room parameter back at the system parameters screen at the main screen because you can't do that through UCS. But then we added a cabinet attribute here with a slightly different name. And then we added a part level attribute with this slightly different name again. And this one, this object thing, you'll have to find a different way to do this because it needs to include more parts. But you get the idea there. You don't want to just run it on walls and every possible part in CADNavision. You want to make sure you're only running it on like actual parts that are relevant. One thing that I've done in the past too is just look for just panel stock by itself. That might be a good option for this, but I'm not going to worry about it for this example. But so we added the part attribute, and then here's where we did the logic. This is where we need to know whether is this part following the part, the cabinet, or the room, and that's what's happening here. And then if it's set to send to CNC, we don't do anything. If it's set to do not send to CNC, not only do we remove it from Screen to Machine Center, but we also remove it from Report Center here. So that gets us all caught up on our questions for this week. So that concludes episode 2. And again, feel free to join the group, ask your own questions. I think this is going to be a good way of helping me produce not only relevant content, but it's also, I don't even have to think of ideas. I can just come on here and answer questions. So that accomplishes a lot of things. It helps me be more consistent with my videos, but it also helps me be more relevant because I'm answering actual questions instead of trying to dream up questions. So feel free to join the group, and I will see you guys inside, and feel free to ask your own questions, and I'll answer it in the next episode.